Welcome into Trucker Talk Radio. You're on Behind the Wheelhouse with J and J. I'm John. This is Justin. Today we got on a guest who is someone who's not just building a brokerage, they're building trust in the community. So let's go ahead and bring Sean in. You're on Behind the Wheelhouse. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. Appreciate the invite.
So you're the owner of Klimson Logistics.
Correct.
You're a nationwide transportation provider, a broker, offering everything from LTL to full truckload, refrigerated, expedite, and drayage, correct?
Yep. Nailed them all.
All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get started in logistics? It looks like you were in insurance first. How'd you get started in this crazy world?
Yeah, crazy is the right word. We had no prior knowledge of logistics. I graduated when I was 20 with my master's. Could not find a job. Degree sounded cool, but there was no experience behind it.
Mhm.
So I was kind of struggling. And then Farmers Insurance took a chance on me. I kind of make the joke that I think as long as you didn't have a felon on your record, they would bring you on board.
Yep.
So I did
Yep.
that for a short amount of time, basically
You and
about
I
10
started the
months.
same way. I was
Yeah.
at Western Southern
Okay.
Insurance, and they were the only one that would hire me out of college for $24,000. And yeah, and just kind of had to claw my way through.
Yeah. And I didn't even have that good of a deal. So I had my own agency, which it was more of a long-term play, right?
Yeah.
So first year you got to hit your certain, thresholds, and then from there was like a 5-year track. And so I got to about the 10th month and I was burned out. I was working about 60 to 70 hours a week, at 20, 21 years old, no social life.
Yeah.
And I kind of forced myself to say, okay, if you sign on to do this, this is your career for life because you're not going to work those 5 years, hit all those thresholds, and then give it up to somebody else.
Of
You're going
course.
to be in this for life. So I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just not happy. This isn't what I want to do. So I walked away from that. My brother was on a men's 12-inch softball team, and they had nationals, I think maybe 2 weeks after I left Farmers, and guy got hurt or had to pull out. So I ended up subbing for him. So we're just taking batting practice one day, and the one guy asked, if I was working. I'm like, nah, I just left insurance, kind of looking for something. He owned a logistics company as an agent. He's like, why don't you come work for me? So literally, we're just, shagging fly balls and got
Yeah.
a job offer on the spot.
I
So
think there's a lot of stories like that out there. College
Yeah.
college grads kind of,
yeah.
being working in sales. Yeah, I was in advertising after insurance and I was still struggling.
Hmm.
Couldn't get my footing. And then my son's godfather came over to the house with a new truck or car or whatever he had. And I said, "How'd you get that?"
It
And he said, "I'm moving trucks." And I was like, "Well, I can do that."
was like the Wolf of Wall Street scene, right? You look at the
Exactly
bank
right.
stuff, you're like, all right, I'll
Yeah.
quit what
I
I'm doing to
had
go
two
do that. Yeah.
phones. I had two phones. And I was like, what the hell am I supposed to do with these things? And then they
Hmm.
start lighting up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah. So yeah, we had I think nationals were let's call it like early August or something, and then I started the Monday after Labor Day. So a month later I was there, knew
Yeah.
nothing. They were a small operation, so it was two guys who co-owned the agency. They were an agent for Priority One out of North Little Rock, Arkansas.
Hmm.
Yep.
Myself
I've
and
worked for
one other
them.
guy. Yep. Myself and one other guy as sales reps, and then one operations person. So we were working out of the one guy's townhome. You know what I mean? It was just roll your sleeves up, get to work. So just kind of learned as it went, throughout all the craziness they were doing. And then I would say about maybe 6 months, 8 months later, we moved into an office. They started bringing on some people. So, that's how I got into logistics. And then in terms of kind of my career transitioning, so I would say about a year into that, I kind of started seeing a way that they operated just from kind of the customer service aspect. And I
Hmm.
felt there was a different way to approach it and kind of a better way, whether it was better in my mind or just better suited for my kind of personality and my type of, service.
Man, it's like I'm looking at myself in the mirror right now.
Yeah. And so I was, probably 22 at this point, but just where I was at in my life, I wasn't ready to kind of make that jump, right? Because you're starting, from nothing and trying to get people to. Because I ran into this with insurance. I would walk into somebody's house, trying to tell them why they need, auto insurance, home insurance you need, but then trying to sell them on life insurance. It's like, what do you know as a kid? I barely had any hair on my face. You know what I mean? It's
Mm.
like you've got a full family and kids and everything. So it was kind of the same vein, once I got into logistics, I just didn't have enough experience and knowledge to when you get in that tight pickle is okay, how do you answer this and provide that
Yeah.
level of comfort with, your client that if something goes wrong, you've experienced it, you know how to handle it, how we're going to pivot, or find a solution. So I kind of stayed there, went through some of the good patches, the rough patches. But kind of always in the back of my head, I knew, okay, there's a better way to do it, better way to do it. And then I just think that ownership wasn't aligned with kind of what my career goals were. I
Mhm.
think they were very much set on they kind of grow when everyone else kind of stays flat. So there was always going to be a cap there in terms of how much I could grow, how much I could make. So kept looking at it. And then I would say around year 4 or 5, we had a company that just went dark on us, owed us a large sum of money. And me as the rep, I was responsible for half of that. So, that's a tough thing to walk into. So I basically worked out an agreement with them. I had taught myself truckload because at the time, the company I worked for, they did all their truckload through corporate. Well, we're out
Mhm.
of Chicago, they're out of North Little Rock, Arkansas. It's a night and day work ethic time, right? Like everything here
Mhm.
is boom, boom, boom for us, and they're just casual. And granted, we're not the only, agency they're responsible for, but as a young guy, you're trying to get your foot in the door, make your mark. And so my thing is if I can get a quote back in a couple minutes, somebody's going to remember that. And then if I can,
Yeah,
walk the walk, talk the
absolutely.
talk, you're going to get more opportunities. Well, if I'm waiting for an hour on a quote, what I mean? I look like any other broker. So I went to, the managers at the time, the guys I worked for. I was like, hey, do you mind if I teach myself how to do this? They're like, yeah, I don't care. As long as you bring in loads and customers, do it. So I was doing it on my own for that one large account that ended up going bankrupt and then some other accounts. So once they went bankrupt, I kind of worked with the owners and said, listen, here's my portion that I owe. How about I just do truckload in-house for you guys? You don't have to outsource it to corporate. I'll just kind of be your truckload manager essentially, and then
Yeah,
pay me
great
a
idea.
wage. And so I basically worked a year and I think it was like 3 or 4 months to pay off that essentially and just continue to kind of sharpen my skills, learn more and more about truckload, building carrier relationships, kind of all that thing. So I was always kind of taking these opportunities to further what I was capable of doing. And then that wrapped up, I want to say it was like October, November of 2019. So then I had the opportunity to go back into actually building my business because most of my day was consumed with covering everyone else's stuff, not essentially, earning new clients. So then COVID hits. I start working from home just because of the situation. And I got to a point, I think it was like January or February, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to do it, there's no better time than now, right? I mean, everything's
Mhm.
shut down. It's quiet, but we don't really know how quiet it's going to be, at the moment. And so March of 2020, I, set up a whole situation and walked away and kind of bet on myself. So did that for a little over five
Congrats.
years
Yeah.
with GLT. They were out of Miami, Florida. We were an agent for them. And then
Mhm.
at the end of last year, we pivoted and we signed on with Global Trans, one of the largest players. So we've been their top agent so far for the first quarter, having a really good year. So that's kind of my, long story short, career into logistics and then to current day.
What's your staff look like there?
So two. At one time we had three, and then one of our operations people, she had came from academia, turned into stay-at-home mom when she was raising their two kids, and then once they got old enough to go into school, she wanted to get back into the workforce. So we brought her back into the workforce, got her well trained. She was with us for about 2 years. So it's just myself. My sister works on the operations and customer service side.
Absolutely. So walk us through what a good broker should actually be doing for a customer, where you set yourself apart from your competition.
Yeah, so I would say two ways. One is you can choose what a lot of people in the industry call that cradle to grave method, right? So
Mhm.
you're relying on your broker to provide you the quote, create the bill of lading, dispatch the carrier, transit times, any delays, claims, all that good stuff. Other companies like the technology component where they just sign on and onboard a customer and then, hey, go into the portal, do all your own stuff, and you kind of handle it and we'll jump in if something goes wrong. I've just never preferred that because what I always tell people, when I'm talking with prospects is if you go in and put that information for a quote and you type something wrong, there's no fixing it, right? If you go and book it, you're stuck at what you put in. Whereas if myself or my team makes that error, we're going to correct it beforehand because we see what the money should be versus off what we quoted. So we'll kind of catch it that way. And then if we
Mhm.
can, we'll absorb it because again, it was our error. If we can't, we'll tell you, hey, we screwed up. Here's the next option. But it's like an extra level of security, whereas the customer, they don't have that. The other thing is these carriers left and right are always changing their rules, tariffs. So you to pay somebody who probably isn't a logistics manager within a company to just go in and run these quotes. They're not going to know all these caveats that go with each carrier. So that's why I believe if you don't have enough volume to go direct to the carriers, where they kind of spell it out and say, hey, here's the stuff, don't break it, and it's usually one carrier. But if you're going to go through a broker, I think you're better off going directly through the broker and letting them handle it, because if they're good at what they do, you're going to see that they're going to find all those things and say, okay, we know we can't use carrier A, B, or C. We can use D. Here's your option. And then it's going to limit how many variances you get. You're not going to get additional bills. So I think that's the one thing. The second thing, a lot of times when I talk with prospects, is look for someone who's either higher up in the company or who has longevity with the company, because I'm sure, as you guys know, within the brokers, name a company and their whole thing is churn and burn, right? It's like you said, find a college
Mhm.
person, pay them that low salary, hope they bring on some
Yep.
great accounts, and then they're going to leave for the next opportunity that stays in-house, and they just grow. A lot of these companies, for better or worse, it's that growth mentality. Because I'm the owner, I can grow us in a sustainable way to where our customer service never suffers, right? I'm not out here trying to make it in the next $1 million, $1 billion company. It's, okay, we're making a fair living for myself, for my team, and what's more important for us is retention. So that's why I always say find someone who's been around a little bit, because they've seen some things, and then that longevity component, because the last thing you want to do is you sign on with, ABC Trucking, you're working with, John Doe, and then a year later he leaves. And if that account rep isn't familiar with your freight, he's not going to teach that next rep, right? So now you're responsible for paying this company to handle your freight. And now you got to go teach another person how to manage your freight, all your location stuff. Like, to me, that's just, it's ass backwards, pardon my French. So I think those are the two things: is find someone with longevity who can actually build a sustainable relationship with, so that if they're good, you're going to continue that retention and work with them. And we always try to say we're not a transportation provider, we're a transportation partner. We are at the point where we get to pick and choose who we work with. And therefore, we want to find companies who value the same things we value, easy to work with in terms of, they don't want to nickel and dime or fight over every little thing. It's like, hey, we're not presenting anything crazy. This is what the carrier tells us. Here's the proof documentation. And we're very fortunate that we've been able to cut out a lot of those post COVID, because, after COVID, everyone was just running saying, hey, I've got freight. If you can move it, great. Here, take it. And then everything kind of rose to its level. So yeah, I think longevity is important. And then, like anything in life, not everyone's fortunate to do what they want to do for a living in terms of loving their job, but you might be really good at something. So you kind of stick with it. So just find someone you enjoy working with. If someone doesn't talk to you right, or you just don't enjoy working with them, there's so many options in the transportation, space. Find somebody who you don't mind talking to, who's there for you when you need it, reliable. And then I would say if you can afford to pay, 2% more at the end of it, it's not going to kill you. So find someone that you can trust that's going to be around, and then hopefully your business grows and they can grow alongside you.
You'd mentioned you're an agent for Global Trans,
Mhm.
correct?
Yep.
So Justin and I are from the agent side, more on the asset side.
Hmm.
Just involved in recruiting it heavily, and I had about 65 trucks, and then eventually sold my agency. But talk a little bit about some of the benefits you feel to be under a company like Global Trans, and be in that agent model versus going completely out on your own.
Well, the first thing, so I can only speak from the agent model because, I've done that twice now, is cash flow and finances, right? So
Yep,
if you're,
100%.
Yep.
you're charging your customer, or the carrier's charging you 100,000, you're charging your customers 150,000 for the month. Well, unless you're fortunate and you're the only account in the world that everyone pays on time, then great, you know what I mean? But you're going to have a couple where they don't get an invoice or they're late, whatever the case may be. So that's the thing. I mean, you have to be incredibly disciplined, and I would say you would want to have a little bit of a runway in terms of finances, because those are big bills. And the second you don't pay the carrier, you could potentially lose your rates. That's the other component. If you're on the LTL side, truckload side, you could maybe get away with it a little bit more because there's so many carriers, right? So you just sign up a carrier. LTL side, unless you've got an in with somebody in pricing, I don't think you're going to be able to get rates that are competitive enough to where why you wouldn't go with one of the bigger players, so that's what I would say. But the agent model, I think what has been good, from what we've seen, because we've done it twice now, is you get all the TMS stuff, because like I've always kicked that around the back of my head, right? So you start as a sales rep, work yourself up, then you become an agent. And then the only next step from that is you either go the corporate route or you pivot and go on your own, right? And start your own 3PL. And I've thought about that, but then it's like, okay, now you need insurance and you need,
Well,
The
legal,
true
don't
back
forget
office
about
support.
legal too. I mean, a
Legal,
claim,
yeah, you need
you get
legal, you
involved
need
with a claim.
TMS, you need, all this
A
Yeah.
stuff. And it's
lot
like,
to it.
Insurance is getting more and more expensive.
right, to then maybe hopefully it works. And then if it does work, then you got to grow it. So it's like, if you want to commit, probably 15, 20 good years, by all means, go at it. I've been doing this for, it'll be 13 years in September. It's like, that's a whole nother career. It's not that you can't do it,
Mhm.
but so I'd say I think the agent model is like that really good feel of where if you do your stuff right, they kind of leave you alone, right? They just come and say, hey, you're doing a good job. Keep it up. Is there anything we can kind of do on the side to help? But again, it's, some people have that gaudy kind of expectation of what they want. And so they go all for it and all the power to you. But from what I've seen, just being in the industry so long, I think it comes down to rates. So you're going to have certain customers where you have those really big rips on, I would say, and that's what keeps you in business. But if they ever look around, your rates aren't strong because you're trying to go against a company like Global Trans or Echo or CH Robinson, where they're going to have the cheapest available because of their volume. You're doing 1/100th or 1/1000th of that. You know what I mean? At some point, it's a numbers game. So I just think it's too tough to not go the agent route, would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I agree. I've thought the same things you have thought about, and with that, it's so much easier, less stress. Sometimes more
Hmm.
money is not worth the extra stress. I want to go back to one thing you we talked about in the very beginning. I actually got my start at Priority One
Okay.
out of Memphis. I started in the LTL side. We don't get a lot of guests that are in LTL. So I kind of want to bring that up. Could you explain to
Hmm.
our listeners what that is, and also talk about just for a second, because I learned a lot. I came from a lumber industry, and that's how I got into the logistics, was because I was
Hmm.
doing a lot of LTL, and it was a way for me to save money on my LTL, kind of like how First Priority and Priority One both got their starts. They had a reason why they started their
Hmm.
logistics side. Those numbers are not huge margins. It's all about volume, and it's a lot of competition. But the one thing I don't think a lot of customers know, and you can go into this because I think this is important, is with a 3PL, you get a system where you can give a customer 20 different quotes from 20 different carriers. If you're an independent, supplier, and then you have to go into each individual login to get a quote, you get 20 different bills in from 20 different carriers. Kind of just speak on that a little bit for our audience that usually don't get that information, because there might be a customer out there that does, or because especially the smaller people,
Absolutely.
and they don't get that, and it's big savings for them if they'll take the opportunity with the 3PL.
Yep. So LTL will start there is think if you're shipping anything as small as one pallet, depending on the carrier, you can get up to 10 pallets. They kind of really shied away from larger type load just because freight's at such a premium right now. So I kind of say 1 to 6 is really the sweet spot. If we're talking standard pallets, anything over 6, then you kind of start getting, it gets a little dicey. Some carriers, yes, some carriers, no. But carriers want to move as much freight as they can on the truck. So they try to optimize that space. Um, Now, in terms of what you're mentioning, twofold. A, price, LTL is going to be cheaper than truckload 99.9% of the time, right? So if I've got one pallet from Chicago, and where are you guys at?
I'm out of Memphis.
I'm in Florida.
Florida.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just use Florida. So Chicago to Florida, I said one pallet. One of our LTL carriers comes and picks that up, and then it's going to move across their network, stop at various terminals along the way. So pick up from your warehouse, goes to their terminal, they pull it off, put it on another truck, keeps doing that all the way till Florida, then it delivers to your customer, right? So you're going to share space on that truck with other customers. That pallet's going to move. It's the most economical, affordable way you can move that. The alternative would be full truckload, your guys' background, where you can put as much stuff as you want on that truck as long as it fits and as long as it's underweight. So if you just had that one pallet and you're utilizing that whole truck, you're not maximizing your efficiency, right? It's not the most affordable option. Now, there are instances where, let's say you work for somebody and they've got a cutoff, right? They need X product to keep their machine running or whatever it may be, then yes, there's certain situations where we're going to have to move that one pallet dedicated. We call that expedite, and there's a couple different options you can do. Sprinter van, think like your local Amazon trucks. You can do a box truck, which is a shorter truck. Those are usually cheaper than a dedicated 53 footer, or you just go the 53-foot route. So there are options, but yeah, generally speaking, LTL is going to be cheaper. And then, as you mentioned, If you are a customer and you want to go direct to the carrier, so we'll just throw out a couple of random LTL carrier names. Let's say AAA, RNL, and Estes. Okay, we'll throw those three out. You're exactly right. You're going to log into each of their websites. You're going to type in zip code, how many pallets, pallet dimensions, pallet weight. If you need any special services, delivery appointment, residence, lift gate, click a button, you're going to get a quote, right? Now you're going to have to do that for each carrier that you're set up with. Or your alternative option is you go to a broker like myself, send us that information. We put that into our proprietary system. We get that quote back within usually 30 to 45 seconds. And as you mentioned, we have, I think, in total up to 80 LTL carriers in our network. Some are regional, some are local, some are national. And then we can specify it based on what you need. So usually it comes down to three things. It comes down to price, it comes down to transit time, and then the third
Mhm.
thing would be the cargo insurance. So let's say you're moving a high value item that's $10,000. Well, if the carrier only has $2,000 coverage, we wouldn't want to use them because now you're short, right? We have a third party insurance, but let's leave that to the side for now. So then we would give you an option. So that's where kind of all these necessity items come in so that we're properly quoting your freight to make sure that you're covered in each capacity. So we can give you an economical option that maybe is a 5-day transit from Chicago to Florida, and then you could say, here's our fastest option. It's 2 days, right? And then do you want to pay that upcharge to have it? We also have guaranteed transit. So if it picks up today on 2-day lane, it's 2 days. It would deliver on Wednesday. So there's all those little, again, things that as a broker we see on a daily basis. We can tailor to what your specific shipment needs. But going back to your point, Justin, if you don't work with a broker, however many carriers you have set up, you have to go and get that quote individually one by one. Now, if you're a smaller emerging type company and you move one pallet a day or one pallet every 3 weeks, great. That works for you. It makes sense, right? If they're giving you great rates, stick with it, let that happen. We talked with a prospect a while back. They had that. I'm like, keep that carrier on your back burner because that's a great, asset to have. Now bring us into the fold for the rest because if there's a lane that they don't like or don't want, they're going to be super high. Now you've got a plan B, right? And that's kind of always what you want. You don't want to put all your eggs into one basket. But we have that opportunity where we can bring all those options to you in a matter of seconds and make sure that we're checking
And
off
you're
all
getting
those
discounts
boxes.
because you've got the volume.
That's the other
Exactly.
thing, right? So
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah, that's what I tell everyone, like this prospect we talked to. I told her if you've got direct rates and they've been working, it's been a couple of years, we've got enough options, we'll leave them off to the side, right? I can quote you other people. If it gets to a point where they're not winning enough, then they're eventually going to say, hey, what are we doing? And then you can say, well, I've got this option with this provider. They might just let it go because it's not enough volume, right? A couple pallets a month. Now, but going back to your point, Justin, is every time you have to log into all those portals to get a quote, if you're an account that has 15, 20 shipments a day, you're never going to get anything shipped because that's time and money,
Exactly.
right? So
Yep.
that's where it starts coming into you work with somebody, like for us, for example, if you have that type of volume, we build each location into our system and each item. So then that way everything's just boom, boom, boom. We try to create the processes on the front end so that it's rinse and repeat. That way we can't really make mistakes, right? We know if we're picking
Mhm.
up from John's warehouse in Florida, they only ship from say 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. So we know that we got to get that scheduled by 11 at the latest to give the carrier enough time, right? Or we know they need a delivery appointment or a lift gate or whatever,
Mhm.
whatever each location has. But we put all that stuff in there because we're doing hundreds of quotes a day, so it's just physically impossible to remember everything. But B, it takes it off the customer's plate, and that's what we try to do. That goes back to that partner component of us is we want to take the logistics off your plate, let you focus your time and energy on other components of running your business because essentially we want it to be set it and forget it, right? Hand it off, don't have to think about it. We know you're going to handle it. And what I say, it doesn't sound very fun, but we provide boring results. You expect your stuff to get picked up and delivered, right? That's the
Mhm.
expectation.
Absolutely.
And that's what we do. You only hear from stuff in the supply chain or logistics when it goes wrong. If it goes right, everyone expects, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. And you're absolutely right. We are, but if you hear from your provider, it's because something went wrong. A pickup got missed, a guy got a flat tire, and then all of a sudden it's the most important thing in the world that nobody failed to mention. And now, you're trying
Yeah.
to, move a mountain to get it figured out. But yeah, so that's what I say is, you come to us, we've created a process where whether you move one shipment with us or we've got accounts that are moving hundreds of shipments a month with us, we handle every shipment the exact same way. And the reason we do that is A, We don't want any customer to feel like they're just a number. It goes back to that relationship component. We're not transactional. We want you to actually feel like you're part of working with us, that we're true partners. And B, that way we can't skip steps. We can't forget a shipment. We can't leave off a reference number for their accounting. And then we're all going back trying to figure it out. We can't leave off an accessorial and get charged an extra fee because now it needs redelivery. So all these little things, we take those measured steps so that we check off those boxes on every shipment, and then it's just repeatable. That's what it's rinse and repeat. You move a shipment with us today, and then you move a shipment with us in December, you're going to get the same process. And we're not going to change that because that's how we've been able to manufacture our successful business and grow despite, COVID and then switching providers and then switching providers again. So we found a situation that works for us. It's not common in our field because a lot of the agent miles are going to that technology route because that forces them more time to spend on sales and growth and accumulation. For us, it's more about retention, growing the current customer base we have, getting referrals, becoming a name within certain industries, and kind of growing and expanding that way a little bit more organically.
Now, are you guys doing primarily LTL?
So yeah, I would say going into last year, I would say we were probably about an 80-20 split on LTL. It got closer to about 65-35. We had brought on an enterprise account that was strictly truckload. So they
Okay.
helped skew the numbers a little bit. And then they had management change. So the RFP this year, we were selected. And then like a day before, maybe a week before, they told us we were out and they stuck with their current or previous provider. So another fun thing in the logistics world, right? You can do everything
Yeah.
right, and then all of a sudden your person's
Yep.
out and it's like you're back to the drawing
Right.
board. But yeah, so I'd say now we're probably closer back to like 80-20, I would say, in terms of LTL, maybe 75-25.
So my question is, we had on Shannon Everett. He's founder of American Truckers United, and we're talking about, fraud in the industry and
Mm-hmm.
what, steps carriers are taking to deal with chameleon carriers and how are they vetting their carriers? How are they vetting the dispatchers? And, how are they vetting the drivers? We're seeing brokers request CDLs, selfies, real-time verification, that kind of stuff. So what is that like in the LTL market? How much fraud are you dealing with? How does global trans, if you are, help you with that fraud? And what kind of driver information are you requesting when you go to book that load?
Yeah, so the LTL side, I mean, I'm gonna knock on wood throughout this whole topic, but we don't see fraud in terms a lot. If we do, it's covered under their cargo, right? Because once they pick it up and assign a pro to it, we're only using carriers that we have contracted rates with. So especially someone as large as Global Trans, they don't want to jeopardize that business. So if a
Right.
driver makes a poor decision and decides to steal something or dock work or whatever the case is, there's visual proof. You picked it up on this day. Here's a sign, BOL, here's a pro number. It never got delivered. We file a claim, goes through that process. So LTL side, I wouldn't say I see it. We don't have to do as much with drivers. Every now and then you'll get into a goofy situation where they won't tell you they use a partner carrier. So,
Mm.
they'll go and pick up on behalf, but the driver is just being lazy and won't say, hey, I'm picking up on behalf of AAA or whoever the case may be. So then the shipper doesn't give in, then you kind of got to reschedule and go through that whole thing. Truckload sides where obviously it's much more rampant. So I will say highway.com, we're equipped with that. As soon as you get an email, you can see if that email is registered on highway with that carrier's MC. So that's one way to immediately detect if they don't have the same domain. We don't even respond to it, right? You don't get any information. Another thing we do is so we'll post, on a truck board. They'll reach out to me via email. That's another trick I learned is because you'd post something, not as much now because, demand's way down, but post COVID is you'd post your phone number and like you guys said, you've got two phones and you can't even talk to somebody because I'll say so. I just put the
Yeah.
emails in. I'll let the emails flood through. 30 emails come in. I'll take the post down, then kind of go through because it's a more manageable pace. But once they come through, it's dispatch name, dispatch number, driver full name, driver number, truck trailer, and then we always ask for the truck VIN. If that truck VIN's not on their insurance, we won't use it. So if there's any sort of discrepancy, we'll ask for a picture of the truck just to again verify. And I think you can tell who some of the shadier carriers are because there's a delay in getting that information, right? So either they're having to try and hack or whatever the case is, and then we go and verify it with the dispatcher on the phone. So even though they send us that information, we call and make sure who's emailing us is who we're talking to, get on the phone, and then we also use trucker tools. So once we send that Raycon, text message immediately goes to the driver. They have to accept it. So then that way we have tracking on the unit that is scheduled to pick up and deliver. We can track it all the way through.
With the way things are going in verification, with the policies and or the companies you had mentioned, how important has that become over the last couple of years? I mean, because they even had an episode on 60 Minutes
Hmm.
come on actually last night talking about driver verification,
Hmm.
chameleon carriers. The criminals get smarter every day.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I say. How important is that verification now and more into the future because we know we're battling this constantly?
Yeah, I definitely think I would say it's more important now. Another thing we do is so we'll send the BOL to the shipper, whether it's our customer or not, and we put all that information in there so they know. And I think shippers have gotten better at it, at least the ones we work with. So I'm fortunate, but I'll send in and say, hey, Joe Smith is the driver. If someone gets there and let's say the dispatcher changed drivers on us because they had a local maybe go pick up and they don't tell us, usually the shippers are emailing or calling saying, hey, you said this guy's picking up, this guy's here. Are we good to load? So I think shippers have gotten a little bit better on that. Even though drivers don't have the BOLs, they'll make sure that they have the right reference. Whatever the case is, there's got to be some sort of correlating information instead of just
Right.
blindly loading the truck. But I do think it's more important now. I would say, a lot of times when we talk about truckload, we say how, the world shut down in 2020, right? 2021 came and everyone reopened, and it was like, okay, we've got 6 months to try and make up a year of being closed. So all these carriers flooded the market. There's not a lot of barrier to entry, right, to become a carrier. I mean, people are buying
No. Yeah.
MCs and just, hey, I've got all this authority now. But I think because there was so much demand and so much freight, nobody was stealing loads then, or it wasn't as rampant because there was freight to move. So everyone was just happy that they could go and find freight, get their trucks moving. Everyone's making money. Well, like anything, if you don't have relationships at some point, it's going to turn back the other way, right? We couldn't stay in this rocket ship of an economy, especially on the logistics side for that long. So that lasted 21, 22 kind of tapered off a little bit. And then 23 kind of got back to what we would consider normal. Well, all these carriers that ran and entered the market that were getting freight, they had nothing to rely on anymore because they had no business relationships. They were just able to get in at a hot market, get freight, move it, make money, and they thought that would sustain. Well, once that didn't sustain, I think they had so much invested, whether it was buying trucks, leasing truck, whatever the case is, insurance, overhead, all those things. I think that's where the chameleon aspect started coming in and the stolen loads. It was like, okay, we've invested in this, but we don't have a path to make money the way we were. How can we, like you said, as criminals get smarter, how can we kind of pivot to make this financially feasible for us? And I think that's kind of where that started. And then, like you said, criminals get smarter, so then we have to get smarter and we have to take extra precautions. I don't think it's necessarily for the worst, right? Because before it was like back in the day, you would call a carrier and just say, "Can you move this?" They'd say, "Okay," and then and you never meet them, you never talk to them, and so there's a lot more steps in place now to prevent that. Knock on wood, I haven't had that happen. I hope that streak continues, but I think it's because we make those extra steps, right, of going through, you got to give me the driver information. And we don't provide any of our Raycon information until we get all that and we cross check it first because
Yeah, a
that's the,
lot of the brokers out there are not even giving pickup
mhm.
information
Yeah,
until
it's
they
all zip
speak with the
codes. Yep.
driver. Until it,
Yeah.
yeah, it's zip codes only. I think, probably some of the larger brokers like TQL and CH kind of started that deal where and it
Hmm.
would be frustrating. I remember
Oh
my
yeah.
guys, they'd be like, they'd send over the zip codes, didn't have any of the pickup information. It's like, we
Hmm.
need to speak with your driver first. And, we talk about it. One of our major sponsors is Ready App, and they're doing some things, talking to companies like Highway. They're more focused on the driver passport, independent driver verification, and then matching that up with the VIN. Because, like you said, drivers can get switched, mid go. We're now seeing brokers ask for CDLs,
Hmm.
selfies, even FaceTime verification.
Mm.
It's not something that brokers used to do, right? So at what point do you think something like, I mean, that becomes the standard where, shippers want to know, right, who's coming to their door?
Hmm.
How important is that?
Yeah, well, if you're a broker, is take as many precautions as you can in terms of over communicate versus under, right? So like I said, we send that information to the shipper. So what I get from the carrier, I copy and paste, send that over. The only thing I don't include is driver phone number because you can get a shipper that's very hands-on, right? And then they call the
Hmm.
driver. And I'm in Chicago, so if you're delivering a load in Texas and you get into it with the driver and the driver doesn't want to play ball, I can't help you, right? So I try to just kind of be the middleman there. So that's the one piece of information I don't give, but truck VINs on there, truck trailer numbers on there. Sometimes they'll say, hey, this is the color of the truck, or, this is what it says on the side of it. Is that information? It can't hurt, right? So you send the BOL, here's the reference number. Just make sure everyone's kind of on the same page because essentially that's your job. You're the broker. You're in charge of arranging the carrier, arranging the pickup, arranging the delivery. So all those things fall within, our parameters. So if we can share that information to make sure that there are no hiccups. And then I guess another step would be just when we send a BOL, we ask for confirmation that you received it, right? Because the last thing you want to do is a truck gets there and they're like, hey, we don't know what this is. And then maybe start putting in the email. If any of this information doesn't track, give me a call. Please don't load the truck until you get confirmation from us, which again, I think I'm fortunate because we do enough trucks with our current clients that they're familiar with that. So if something seems
Right.
off, they'll call and
Mhm.
say, hey, before we load this, we need confirmation, or they'll tell the driver, you can send the doc. We're not loading you until we get, confirmation from Sean, or you give us X number, whatever the case may be. So I think shippers are doing a much better job of being cautious. And then I think on the broker side, it's just, again, just over communicate it. It can't hurt. So,
I agree with you, and that's something that that Ready app is doing is they've got this driver passport, and it's all the information you're wanting and wanting before you'll send a BOL or any of that. The drivers can actually click a button and send you all that, and then
mm,
you can match them directly with the carrier, just like you would a highway with the VIN number. The carrier has a side that actually shows you, yes, that driver is on with us, or no, that driver was fired, 6 months ago
yeah.
because that happens a lot as
Hmm.
well. So
Or if they're an owner op or something. Yeah, absolutely.
right. So
Yeah.
I think that's right in line. What's the future for KLS? What's your 5-year plan?
It's a great question. So I'll be 34 later this year. I always joked I don't have kids. I'm not married. So I was like, oh, if I could retire at 40, that'd be great. But truth is, I really enjoy what I do. I've got to do a better job of figuring out that work-life balance. I work a lot, right? So I think this year I've got 2 scheduled days to take off. So I'm slowly kind of getting there, but I don't take vacation. It's almost like your baby, right? You build it, and kind
Hmm.
of going back to what you guys said when I was a sales rep. I had those months where there was no big check coming in, right? So like when you've been at the bottom and you see how bad it can get to now build it here, I'm very grateful for what I, have built and created and the clients that continue to give us the opportunity and then continue to choose us. One thing that always sticks out with me is when I left Priority One and joined GLT, I didn't know how much my book would come, right? It's in the middle of a pandemic. We don't know what's going to happen. 92% of my accounts came with our biggest one taking a full year to onboard just because of how the world was. And
Right.
we made more in those 6 months than I'd made in any year previously in my career. So obviously, it was the right move. And then when I made the decision to go to Global Trans, same thing. Wasn't sure how much would come. I felt better about it, but again, you got to go through all those accounting differences, right? And now you got to get all the billing changed. And we had 100% retention come over, so it just goes to speak that when you do things the right way and you continue kind of just build brick by brick, you have the right foundation, the success tends to follow. So it's one of those things where I always say if you get these BS emails in your inbox of, oh, this firm's looking to buy and yada yada yada, I'm like, it's all smoke, right? I'm like, if they have an
Hmm.
actual offer, feel free to come to me and we can have a talk. But
Right.
I would
Everything's for
say,
sale, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if there's a number, everyone's got a walk and away number. There's no doubt about that. I would much more enjoy, being on a golf course at 7 a.m. than, booking trucks and checking on problems from yesterday. But I would say at least probably 10 to 15 more years of this, I would think, growth is always something we talk about. It's that tough thing. I was just talking with someone in corporate yesterday. So like, same thing. What are your goals? And I said it's that toughest thing because yes, I'd want to bring on a salesperson, but going back to being financially smart, cash flow, all that stuff, you're paying before you see results, right? So I've always
Hmm.
been from the avenue of I don't want to pay you a high base, but I will pay you a very high commission because if you're good and you're as good as you say you are, you're going to make more than you would if I gave you a high base
Right.
and you're
Yep.
5%, 8%,
100%.
whatever the case is. Like I know it because I do it every single day. I don't have a base salary, right? Everything you make as an agent is essentially commission. So I get it from that perspective. And if I had that mentality, like going back to your previous question of somebody who maybe wants to go the agent route or go the on their own route, if you're not good with all the business acumen, your books and
Yeah,
paying
the back
people and
office is a
hiring
lot of
people,
work, isn't it?
It
absolutely,
is.
right? And it's time
Mhm.
consuming and it comes at the worst time, right? It's like, okay, today's the day to do payroll or 401k or whatever the case
Mhm.
is. And then that's the day where you've got 700 problems. And it's like, now your
Absolutely.
day turns into a 12, 14-hour day. So I would say if you're one of these people who's interested in the agent model, before you go into it, try and see if you can interview a broker like myself, get their firsthand account, ask yourself if you're good enough to be a leader, you're good enough to work those long hours because that's ultimately what it comes down to. And if that doesn't feel comfortable for you or you don't have the right kind of DNA for that, go find someone who's going to offer you a sales position as a high commission like we've talked about, and then you're
Mhm.
essentially getting that same cut, right? So you're not going to get the whole pie, but you're going to make more than you ever could make in your current sales rep job because they just want to bring you in, handcuff you, not take your
Right.
accounts. So
Yep.
I would say that, but yeah, that's kind of the growth thing we always run into is okay, we could hire because we have the demand, but then what if things fall off, or again, just it's hard for me knowing how hard I work and how much I've invested in this to bring on somebody who doesn't have that same mentality. And now I'm paying money for mediocre results. That's why I've just been content with building it the way we built it. And like I said, we've been successful. We're at a point where, which is very odd for this industry. I haven't made a sales call in over 3 years now, which nobody in
Wow.
this industry does. You know what I mean? Everything, we'll still do some cold emailing here and there. LinkedIn's been a big platform for us, but like I said, mostly everything is organic, referrals, things of that nature, just us
Yeah,
having a
and sales
presence in the
calls are
industry.
really kind of going away. I mean, you got to
They
do the
are.
social media, you got to do the
Yeah, and I
LinkedIn
feel like you
outreach, you got
hear
to,
that, and then it's one of those things where it starts to go away, so then it'll pick back up the traction because nobody's
yeah,
doing it, right? And
right.
it just goes through cycles like everything. But I've just found the other thing we didn't get a chance to talk about that. I'd like to talk about that we do. So we do a campaign called Together Talks.
I was
Um,
actually just going to
yep,
Yep.
say that. Give a plug
beautiful.
for Together Talks
Yeah.
and
So
let people know how they can get a hold of you.
that's another way we differentiate ourselves. As far as I know, there's no one in the logistics industry who does it. So we're not as cool as you guys. We don't have a radio. Ours is like an old school magazine article. I'm hoping one day maybe a podcast, just not enough time in the day for it right now. But essentially, what it is, we'll sit down with a company, whether it's a founder, C-level exec, whatever the case is, and just kind of go through start to finish what their story is, why the company was started, successes, struggles, challenges, lessons learned. And then we basically take their answers, like I said, old school magazine article. We share that across our website, all of our socials, so LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, goes on our Google page. What's unique about it is it's completely free. So we haven't charged anyone a single penny. We just take time out of our day to do this. Tomorrow will be our 237th feature. So we've done that from 2024 until today. It's an opportunity where we get to show people what we're about outside of our work, right? So we take time out of our day to feature these companies, give them that recognition, give them that publicity. And then what we found, we've been very fortunate is when prospects or collaborators that we interview then have the need for freight, they now have someone that they've actually spoken to, right? So we create kind of the seed, this personal connection. We talk about very vulnerable things, in terms of building a business, but they just don't go on Google and, the first thing they find. Or what's even cooler is some of these companies aren't in a position yet to move freight, but they talk with someone within the industry who are, and they make referrals to us. You know what I mean? So it's people that we never even knew, never talked to, but now they're reaching out because they know who we are, what we're about, how we help somebody. And so that's just another way. It's a very small sales arm, but for us, it's just about kind of planting those seeds, getting our name out there. And again, our big thing is we want to be different, right? You have to stand out. There's so many logistics providers. And if we're not making sales calls and we don't have that Uber growth model, well, how are you going to continue to grow and sustain, And so this is one way that we found to do it. And like I said, it's authentic to us, what I think is the most important. That's why I don't make sales calls. There's nothing worse than calling and some guy saying I'm the 30th caller of the day. Don't call back. It's just deflating. It's a very
Yeah.
tough. It's
Yep.
one
No,
thing to get
you
told
got to
no.
find a way to stand out, right? You got to find a
Absolutely.
way
Absolutely.
to separate yourself from the pack and it's a great idea. And
Yeah.
those out there should take note, separate yourselves and find another way to get the word out. There's so many different ways than making
Hmm.
a cold call where you can kind of develop a warm warm relationship through things like, like what you're saying, like a magazine article or a post. So many different options right now to develop those warm leads.
Yeah, and the other thing too is I think it does a really good job of taking us out of our day-to-day stuff, right? So I always tell
Yeah.
everyone it's like free therapy
True.
for me because for a half hour, 45 minutes, just like this conversation, you step
Same
away
for
from
us.
work, yeah, right? And
Yep,
it's you get to talk to
absolutely.
someone that you never would have met before. And in my
Right.
case, I'm getting introduced to super cool products or amazing people, and it's like
Hmm.
yes, we're both founders and you've created a product which is completely different than me. I just have a service, so I don't have half the stress you do, but we are founders, so we know what it's like to be worried about, are you going to be able to keep the lights on? Are you going to be able to make payroll, right? Or you got this
Yeah.
new huge account. How are you going to manage this new demand? Like there's all these little caveats of running a business that you can relate to. And then, like I said, it's free therapy for me. I can take little bits of nuggets from each person I talk to and apply it to my life or my career. And then the biggest thing that I've taken from it is because we've done so many of them, I think it's very important, not only in this business, but in life to be a connector, right? So now I talk with somebody and they tell me, hey, I use so and so for this service and it was super helpful. And so that clicked off an idea in my head. So about 9 months ago, we started on Fridays on LinkedIn. We call community call out. So whoever we interviewed that week for Together Talks, we asked them to list some individuals or companies who have been impactful or influential in their career or their life or their company. So again, it's a way to give some companies and individuals public recognition and shout out because they've helped somebody else. So again, it's just another way where we're broadening that reach of how can people help, how can people get noticed. So like I always make the joke if, you had a great SEO person, well, somebody's going to see that maybe they need that and then they can reach out because we all wish we could market and advertise more. There's not always an opportunity to do it, right? There's only so much time in the day. So it's just these little things we do where we like to feel like we're giving back and helping others. And then we feel at some point that's going to come full circle. And like I said, it has because we're getting referrals from people that we've never even shipped for, but because we've made a difference or, did something for the right reasons for them, they notice that and you kind of stick in their mind of, oh yeah, you're the freight guy I talked to. I just had a girl, the prospect I was talking about, we interviewed her 2.5 years ago and she just reached out last Friday. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like we're moving two
Yep.
pallets for a guy. He was our third interview on Together Talks in January of 2024. He just reached out 3 years later. You know what I mean? So it's like one of those things. He's like, do you remember me? I'm like, hell yeah, I do. You remember
Yeah,
people you have good
Oh,
absolutely.
most
conversations
definite.
for, but
Yep.
you never know what the future is going to bring. And so, like you said, if you can find a way to differentiate yourself, it doesn't have to be an article or a magazine or podcast. Just, one of the things that I think's been most successful for me is try and find a niche industry. So if you're fortunate to find a customer who you do really well with, see if you can try and tap into other areas because as big as industries are, they're really small when you get into them, right? And everyone
Right.
kind of knows everyone.
Absolutely.
So if you
Yep.
can kind of become a person within that space, it's real easy to start to connect to people because you work with so and so, and then I know and so so, and before you know it, you become, the guy within that or the girl within that. And I think that's another
Hmm.
good, tidbit for someone who's starting out, whether it's sales rep, agent, or whatever the case is. You can find a little niche industry and then, try and position yourself as, hey, I really specialize in this. I think that goes a long way.
I agree. Yeah. Well, so tell that massive LTL shipper who's out there who's looking for a new provider how they can find you.
Let's start with our website. It is klimsonls.com. So that is KLIM as in Mary, SON as in Nancy, ls.com. So our last name, then ls.com. Email is just my first name, Sean, SEAN, at klimsonls.com. Our phone number is 708-980-0920. And then our most frequent social media platform is LinkedIn. If you go on there, we're doing a whole little April scheduled post where we're kind of talking about what LTL is, what full truckload is, kind of what we do as brokers. So that's really
Nice.
good,
Mhm.
informative stuff that we're posting once a day during the week, the work week. And then you'll see all of our Together Talks on there. So like I said, there's 2 a week on there, the community call outs on there. So anything you want to learn specific to that, there's no company that we won't feature. So you don't have to be industry specific. You don't have to be a certain size. We believe everyone's story is important to share and everyone can gain something from a story. So if you're interested in having your company featured completely free, reach out to me. We'll get you on the schedule. We'll be happy to have you guys.
That's great. And if you miss that information, don't write that information down while you're driving. Drive safe, slow down. You can always hit rewind. That's the good thing about a podcast. So, Justin, you want to take us out and thank our sponsors?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to thank our sponsors that make this show possible. First sponsor is Gray Cross. That's graycross.org. It's a nonprofit organization that supports trucking families during tough times and crisis. If you have a loved one that's a truck driver that loses his life on the road unexpectedly, they come in, they can help you in many different ways, from funeral costs, medical costs, food, clothing, just whatever's needed for the families during that tough time. Please go to the site. If you can donate $1, $5, $10, $100, any amount is very appreciated. And then our main sponsor, of course, is Ready App, helping bring verification, trust, and efficiency into trucking. There's a lot going on over there with the driver passport. Broker Verify is fixing to come out. A lot of big things that we should be able to help to announce on the show very soon. Go check them out. If you're a driver, 10, 15 minutes, you can get your driver passport completed. You can share that with anybody in and out of the industry. It's ready-app.com. And this has been another episode of Trucker Talk Radio, Behind the Wheelhouse. Sean, we really do appreciate you coming on and doing the good things in the industry. And we appreciate everybody, and have a good evening.